Now, let us turn our attention to matters Morocco, because Morocco is coming out and doing some brilliant stuff of late. My goodness.
They're ahead of the curve.
Some of the chit-chat coming out of Trump, coming out of Rubio is the finest, sweetest rhetoric I've ever heard. Donald Trump has started to bang on about fighting communism, and he is right to do so.
Absolutely.
Because it didn't go away, it wasn't defeated, it's now been elected in number 10. And it's infiltrated in an insidious manner every last little pore of the body politic and body public, and now increasingly creeping into the private sector. And Marco Rubio has picked up on the narrative. I don't know whether this is in response to the brutal murder of Ann Widdecombe, but he had this to say.
More than 80% of radical violence is now driven by far-left and anarchist actors. These are not abstract statistics. Americans have seen what those numbers mean. An all-out assault on our immigration officers, sniper attacks, explosives, armed ambushes, a transgender shooter opening fire on Catholic elementary school students as they pray, his gun marked with slogans like, "Where is your God now?" A healthcare executive executed in cold blood in the streets. Multiple assassination attempts on a sitting president, and the murder of the greatest conservative activist of a generation, a man who happened to also be a husband and the father of 2 young children, shot and killed while speaking to a crowd of students. This is a distinctive and unique evil. It has always been driven by a hatred, above all else, a hatred for civilization itself.
Well, let's speak now to the wonderful Brilyn. We haven't had him on for a while. I don't know why. We've been remiss because we love him. It's Brilyn Hollyhand, author of Make America Talk Again. First of all, Brilyn, congratulations. Look at you, young little thing, getting a book on the shelf so quickly. Extremely proud of you, young man. But let us talk about this because, you know, we have in the UK what you have in the US. You've had Antifa for a long time. We got the Socialist Workers' Party. We have had for far too long communism in plain sight, cultural Marxism in plain sight, everything from the environmental activists to the sort of, you know, anti-racist activists, the BLM stuff, a lot of it being seed funded by hostile foreign organisations, dividing society, breaking us apart quite deliberately. This couldn't have come a minute later, could it, quite frankly?
You're spot on. America is a nation founded on protests. 250 years ago, we dumped some tea of y'all's into the Boston Harbor and founded a nation that gave us the First Amendment, a right to actually go out there and have this opportunity to protest. But when we open our phones and look on social media and see some of the same paid actors protesting on both sides of the coast with printed out signs, it looks a little bit too paid and a little bit too polished. 2 years ago this week, President Trump was shot in a field in Butler, Pennsylvania, and just 10 months ago, our friend Charlie Kirk was executed for just having an opinion that they disagreed with. These people have taken protest to an extreme because they cannot argue with us anymore. They just have to kill us. They don't have good policies. They don't have good candidates. So the only way that they can win is through violence and fear-mongering. And they think it's going to work, but it's not going to happen.
Yeah, amazing article as well, can I just say, in the New York Post today. And I just want to read a little bit of this. Question authority, tear down institutions, challenge traditions, distrust capitalism, mock patriotism, treat faith as outdated, the family is optional, and America as something to apologise for instead of celebrate. That script isn't rebellious anymore. It's predictable, conformist, and boring. And essentially, the idea that all of this stuff is dangerous is now the new rock and roll. I mean, are the kids really alt-right? Can we really look forward to the next generation, looking at what their parents have done and gone, that was so dreadful, we're going to chuck it all in the proverbial dustbin of history?
Yes, we can, thankfully, because we've seen the worst of big governments during COVID. We don't have to see a test subject or a history class to see what happens when government gets in control of our lives. In every aspect, we can just look at COVID. When they shut us out of schools, they strapped that diaper to our face. They told us we couldn't go visit our granny for holiday dinner, but we could go down the road because the strip clubs were open. None of it made sense to us, but that was because government controlled our lives. Now, what their goal is at the end of socialism, and that's just a fancy word to dress it all up, is to make government your God in life. So when they tell you that the big family is dangerous, when they tell you that patriotism is dangerous, when they tell you that actually having a relationship with God is dangerous, it's all because they only want you to depend and live off the government. And we're going to start living countercultural to that. The whole reason this has become a phenomenon is because my generation has this instant gratification need. So we've grown up in an era where if I want a coffee or a new pair of shoes or a new iPhone delivered to my door, I can click a button and guess what? There it is. But socialism isn't a click a button, one size fits all solution to fix all the world's problems, despite what it's been labeled as on social media.
We were talking about this earlier, actually, and I was saying that instant gratification, the flip side of that is shirking responsibility, basically. When you get so infantilized, so mummied that I want to have my mocha, I want to be able to watch porn, I want to watch this film on Netflix for free, I don't want to have to go to work, I'd rather work from home under a slanket. You know, I mean, we're just all bouncing around in baby grows at this point, which to me seems one of the primary reasons why the birth rate's going down.
Yeah, you're right. And exactly. Why would we have to do anything except get off the couch if you know, in this ideal world, we could just completely live off the government? But it obviously doesn't work. And what I think people need to just take a look at is every single time socialism has been tried, it's failed. It's ripped apart the family structure, it's ripped apart the faith structure, and it's ripped apart the single nation that it's ever touched. So why in the world would we vote it in here? Because we've had people build rafts out of garbage to flee it, to come to our nations, to see freedom. And just like you said, it's going to be voted in the front door of 10 Downing Street or voted in the front door of the New York mayor's office, not snuck in through the back door. Stupid people are electing it into office just because they're so lazy that they think this is going to fix all the world's problems, and it's just going to create more.
Wait, what is the sort of origins of all of this, though? Because I always make the point that, you know, when you look back at the last century, America especially really went to town on fighting communism. You know, I shouldn't mention Vietnam, I guess. But, you know, the Berlin Wall came down, and it's like everyone just said, all right, done now, we won that war. Except we didn't. And actually what's happened is this cultural Marxism has become so insidious. It pervades every single institution in America, as it does in the UK. It's flooded the private sector. It's become neo-religious in its audacity. It has become, you know, you've got to be part of this or you will be ostracised, cancelled and punished. It has now got to the realms of becoming tyranny. And I was saying this, I was on Megyn Kelly's show the other day, and we were talking about the threat to politicians and the threat to people with right-wing attitudes in the media. And I was saying, but it's also ordinary people. It is the teacher in the classroom who feels like they couldn't come out and say that I voted for Trump. It is the small business that doesn't want to have to wave a pride flag, but risks being, I don't know, shut down by the local authorities if it doesn't. It is every single man, woman and child living in the West right now who knows, because they have been told, whether explicitly or otherwise, that if they don't think a certain way, speak a certain way, act a certain way, and adopt a certain set of seemingly out of nowhere mad policies, such as men can be women, that they will be punished. And we all know that. And we live with that. And my argument is, if you fear the loss of something, if you live in a country where you think your livelihood could be taken away, that you could be socially shamed, that you could be financially punished, or at the very furthest end of the scale, you could be verbally or physically abused and attacked, then that's tyranny. And yet this has gone on now for, you know, a couple of decades. How did this begin?
So as we were worried about fighting socialism overseas, we had these protests in America that started sparking some socialism within our own country. And again, they called it socialism because it fit better on a bumper sticker. In reality, it was just communism dressed up a little bit nicer with some makeup. Now, what happened was we had a hippie movement here in this country. And during the hippie movement, we had a lot of these socialists become activists in professors' clothing, kind of sneak into our higher education system. And at first, it was just college. They said they needed more diversity in college. They needed some of these more free-thinking, liberated people in our universities. And of course, they got tenure and they stayed, and they trickled down all the way to pre-K now. And so when our students come through, they are indoctrinated about gender pronouns and how not to offend somebody, but they're not taught about how socialism is spelled in every country. Therefore, when we try to introduce it here, everybody's like, this brand new concept, socialism. Of course we will. So in this country today, I debated on campuses where students come up to me and say that they've written 2 versions of their essays to turn in. And I'll look at them and say, why would you do that? That's double the work. They say, well, the first version, they believed in. But before they submit their essay, they go back and re-edit it to make themselves sound liberal to get a better grade from these professors that are really activists. We've gone to war for other countries for lesser freedom. But here in this nation, we're literally self-censoring ourselves just to get a better grade, to get a degree from these people that are actually at the protests on the weekends, but are supposed to be educating us on the weekdays. It makes no sense.
Right, this is, I mean, if you are living in a society where you're having to self-censor for attitudes that are perfectly normal and non-dangerous and perfectly societally viable, you are living in a tyrannical regime. You are being actively oppressed. And I think that people need to wake up to this. And I'm very glad that you've got Marco Rubio and Donald Trump coming out and fighting this face-on. Now, let us talk now about what is going on in the Middle East, because things aren't heading towards an easy solution there. What is America's attitude now to Iran? Because, you know, Donald Trump is in a situation where he's got to keep on, doesn't he? Iran wants this war. Donald Trump, as much as he might try and negotiate some sort of peace, it ain't going to happen with the IRGC. But does he face a backlash from Republicans who largely tend to be a little bit non-interventionist?
So I think I'm glad that we have a president who's not going to allow America to be trampled on anymore on the world stage. At the same time, he's a president that got into politics because he's anti-endless war, and I certainly think the president is working to get us out of this war. Now, obviously, we pray for the families of the 2 service members that we lost yesterday, and there's obviously going to have to be retaliation for things like that. Previously, under our last president, who would have been asleep still right now, he would have, been awoken to the news, I guess, at noon, and would have just, put out a strongly worded statement and moved on. As you can tell from this president, we don't just send strongly worded statements anymore. If you chant death to America, if you attack our troops, we're going to retaliate. And if that means that this war continues a little bit, for us to be able to make sure that not only is not America at threat, but the rest of the world at threat from this terrorist regime that wants to take over the entire world, and that doesn't just include America, we're just the big bad villain in their eyes, then that's what's going to have to happen. But I think the president's been clear. I think this is definitely something he's going to work to wrap up before our midterm elections here in America in November. We've already seen gas prices start to come down in the country. We hope that continues. But yes, there's definitely some patience running out as we see how long this is going to keep going.
Talk to me as well about how his speech landed about foreign interference in elections, because he did this dramatic number surrounded by his chiefs in security and intelligence, saying that he has got grave concerns that the Chinese can infiltrate American voting systems ahead of the midterms, produce the receipts. And yet what I saw from media in this country, typical reaction, is screaming about, oh, he's trying to gerrymander the results. He's pretending that the elections are going to be rigged because he can't win them. And yet, over here, when Trump actually won the first time round and we got Brexit, which happened at the same time, it wasn't because of democracy, it wasn't because the people had been listened to. No, it was Russia. Why is it that, you're only allowed to admit to there being electoral interference when it's Russia messing about with turning everything right-wing, apparently, whereas China, who do have platforms such as TikTok, which are basically giant psyops, nothing to see here, no, don't you look over there, because it might be some communists trying to spread communism or something, I don't know. Try and explain to me, how did that land in America? Did people wake up and go, my goodness, we're under threat? Or has there been, has it sort of gone in the wrong direction?
Well, it's exactly the same thing here, Alex. We had a lot of our media actors paint this as just another conspiracy theory attempt when the president laid out actual hard proof that China meddled in our elections to try to spread their communism in this country, to attack us and divide us from within, which is something that we've speculated on for years. And the president came into office is actually attacking that, delivering on the result, and hopefully we'll get some arrests from that as well as we look forward to this not being allowed here in our country anymore and China not having an influence in our elections. But of course, the exact same media outlets that spent 24/7 coverage with a ticker tape on their screen for 2 or 3 years, just counting down when President Trump was finally going to be caught red-handed for colluding with Russia. And then they finally had to admit that it was their own side that made up the fake evidence that Russia was even involved at all. Now there's silence when there's actual evidence to talk about China. So I definitely think that there's a double standard there that needs to be called out. They don't want to talk about this because they know that China helped their side of the aisle, and they just can't acknowledge that fact. Just like they can't acknowledge the fact that, say, we want to secure elections in this country by doing something which is called the Save America Act, which is really simple, Alex. It's nothing crazy. We just want to prove that Americans are voting in American elections, not Chinese, not Russians, not illegal immigrants, but the same people that are calling out this speech are calling out that act. because they know that they have to depend on illegal votes to get elected. So they can't have us pass the Save America Act because they don't have enough IDs to get elected. It's crazy.
Oh, you've hit the nail bang on the head, as you always do, Brrilyn. The brilliant author of Make America Talk Again, Brilyn Hollyhand. I'm sure you can go and get a copy of that online. He's a brilliant up-and-coming commentator. Well, up-and-coming, he's there. He's established. He's utterly sensational.